Welcome everyone who's in the room and those of you who are participating with us online. This is our last class in this series, and as I mentioned to the students in class, I'm not going to be teaching another class for 6 months until September 6th, and that will be a tarot class, which I've not taught in about 4 years. So that's going to be on the tarot and intuition. In between now and then, in 3 months, we have our conference, which is an all alchemy conference, which will go for 3 days in June, right around the summer solstice. And that'll be held here at the Best Western Rio Grande Inn. So, tonight's class is a continuation of last week. And we're going to be doing a little bit of review in the beginning of this class because the concepts are such that I want them to really filter in. Here's a quote from Dane Rudhyar from his book, The Astrology of Personality. The goal of astrology is the alchemy of personality. And Isabel Hickey, another great astrologer, said, all anyone can see in a birth chart are tendencies that will become facts if he does not do something to alter them. So that's our approach to the chart. It's our approach in working with alchemy. And basically, what the birth chart represents is the sum total of the soul's experiences gained up to the time of birth. And so the chart is cast for the first independent action from the mother, which is taking the first breath. And we believe that there is a mirrored representation of the cosmos at that time of birth, that hologram or that mirror becomes the spiritual DNA for the individual. Now, astrology we call the alphabet of the occult sciences. So all of alchemy is based on the alphabet or the language of astrology. The metals of alchemy, which we were introduced to last week, are symbols, for the planetary thought cells, which are represented in the chart. And we use the language of metallurgy, the language of the metals, to describe the different life experiences that the planets attract to us. So if you remember from last week, we're looking at lead, tin, iron, copper, quicksilver, silver, and gold. These are the 7 metals of alchemy. They correspond to the 7 planets of classical astrology. And for the upper octave planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, we assign the corresponding metal of the lower octave planet. Now, one of the instruments that is always spoken about in alchemical text is called the reverberatory furnace. And basically, what does a furnace do? It melts, it heats, and when an object is heated, what is happening to the molecules in that object? They speed up. They start moving at a much faster frequency. A great kitchen alchemy of this is when you put a pot of water on to boil. When that thing starts bubbling, what's happening is the molecules of combined hydrogen and oxygen are speeding up. And they move first to a boiling state, and then they're moving so fast that they are transformed into a gaseous state and become steam. So what Zane says is, the material alchemist works with the common minerals, such as copper, lead, tin, and iron, in the endeavor to change them into a metal more valuable. The mental alchemist follows similar principles, but the elements with which he works are his thoughts. He seeks to flux them one against the other, reduce them in the astral light, and recombine them in a mental gold that will attract to him ability, wealth, power, and success. He goes on to say, in talking about the reverberatory furnace, the spiritual alchemist goes a step still further. In fact, he takes the highest step possible to embodied man. He uses as his metals the various experiences of life. If some are not at hand that are necessary for this transmutation, he seeks them out. He purifies them, fluxes them in proper proportion, dissolves them in the spiritual light by the aid of a reverberatory furnace, and if the resultant transmutation is successful, he comes into possession of a golden chariot in which his soul may wing its heavenly flight through boundless time and eternity. So he's talking about, this is from Spiritual Alchemy, and he's talking about the development of the spiritual body, which is what we use in the afterlife. But it's only gained through seeking out experiences in this life and trying to bring them all together in the proper proportion. Each of these metals needs to be present for us to be a whole person. Yes?
What is the fluxing process?
Has anyone in the room ever done jewelry making? Okay, if you've worked with metals, then when you're combining different metals or when you are trying to solder metals together, you have to use flux. And flux is usually a substance that alters the pH balance of the metals, which allows two dissimilar metals to be annealed together or soldered together. So it's basically the process of flux is there almost has to be the right, if you think of it as acidity versus alkalinity or masculine versus feminine, receptive versus active, there has to be this proper balance in the process to get the metals to combine together. And that's very important when we are doing the process of transmutation, which is using antidotes as opposed to just converting the energy of a metal, just purifying the metal. Yes, Shoshana?
So essentially the concept of yin and yang.
It is. Flux is very much that concept of the yin-yang, which is that male-female energy or the acid-alkaline energy kept together in this perfect balance to create a whole.
Now, you know what is kind of interesting about the whole yin-yang symbol, too, is if you look at it, right, it's got the black part over here, right? But there's also a small dot on the white part. So basically it means that there is some of one in the other.
Present in the other.
Yeah. Otherwise the other wouldn't exist at all.
Just as the heat of the furnace causes the molecules of the metal to move rapidly, what we're doing in alchemy is we raise our vibratory rate in order to create a spiritual body. So what we're looking for is in every experience we encounter, including the ones that piss us off, we are endeavoring in some way to take advantage of those experiences, to use them to raise our vibratory rate and to be able to gain something from it so that life is a schooling process. It's an educational process that everything that comes to us, even the hard stuff, only adds to our skill or ability. Now, in alchemy, one of the concepts we encounter is called dross. And dross is basically it's a noun. And dross is considered to be refuse or waste matter. And when you mine ores of metal are oftentimes combined with other elements. And so to get at the pure metal, those elements, usually through a crucible in a furnace, the molecules are moved to such a rate that the pure metal separates from the dross or the slag. So the impurities that are removed in a smelting process, in alchemy, as we are working on ourselves, as we are refining our characters, we're doing the same thing. We're identifying each of the metals and determining what are the experiences that we're attracting into our lives that are dross, and what are the experiences that are the pure metal, because it's the pure metal that we want to hold on to or keep. And we'll talk about this a little more and use some examples.
Does metallurgy only refer to that sentence that was there on the last slide?
To dross.
Impurities?
Yes.
What metallurgy means?
No.
I don't think so. Okay.
No, metallurgy
Yeah, I was
is just the process of working with metals. But separating dross from pure metal is the process of heating a metal to such a particular frequency, basically, where the molecules move at such a frequency that the different elements that are combined, because oftentimes in an ore, you have not only the elements of that pure metal in there, but you have other things that are mixed in with that. And when the molecules are brought to such a frequency, they tend to group together and are drawn to one another, and therefore they separate. The dross, or the impurity, separates from the pure metal.
I used to cast into gold, and when that would happen, when you
Get it hot enough, the dross would just dance around and congeal in the middle, and then you could just take a little stick or tool and lift it up and it would come out as one thing. It was easy as pie to purify the metal when it was hot enough. Yeah, just pluck it. I mean, it was totally cooperative. You contacted one molecule of that dross, and it would all come up with you.
And what that represents in our personal process is that if we heat things up enough, it burns off, basically. It does collect in the pure metals left behind. But things being heated up usually sort of implies that there is a very intense situation going on. Oftentimes these are the experiences in life that we think of as being painful. It's not always through the pleasurable times that we're able to separate the dross from the pure metal. Yes, Shoshana?
So basically you have to go through great hardship to get a good reward.
To get a good what?
Reward.
Yes, oftentimes you do. And oftentimes in this process, either once you've lived long enough, as many in this room have, or once you've done this process repeatedly, there's less of a feeling of hardship, that burn of when you're first doing your workout or running or doing your weights or whatever it is. It's yeah, we all hate that. But it's sort of not there in the same way anymore. All that one sees is the end reward and what the abilities are that are gained by going through the process. And that's what the metals are. They are life experiences of different types, some which have dross or unpleasant things tied in with them, impurities, and others which have the pure metal. And one of the ways the ancient alchemists spoke of this is they spoke of the pure metal as being the virtues of that metal. and the dross was considered to be the vice of that metal. So, this reverberatory furnace of the spiritual alchemist is fed by an outpouring of love. Nothing raises the vibrations as quickly as love. It is the love of the oxygen of the air for the carbon in the fuel that gives the material furnace its intensity. Love operates on various planes, but only unselfish love affects spiritual substance.
Is there such a thing?
Unselfish love is when one has as their ultimate concern the well-being of another and not having their own needs met. And that's the difference between selfish love and unselfish love.
Or the greatest good of all.
Or for the greatest universal.
I actually haven't seen
Gibson.
Yes.
Instead of being selfish, you don't have to think of the balance between two ideas, two different things.
Also in spiritual alchemy, Zane gives us some really clear advice. The attachment to appearances must forever be severed. When seen from this higher plane, the things upon which more worldly people dote, and for which they ceaselessly toil and struggle, are recognized to be but the dross of life that must be skimmed from the various molten metals of experience and cast into the waste of perishable debris.
There's sure a lot of dross going on right now.
These very things that men set their hearts upon, when more closely scrutinized, are observed to be but the scum that rises to the surface of life's purer metals when they are melted by the fires of the reverberatory furnace of their cosmic relations. This refuse must be skimmed from the pure and transcendent values that lies beneath it and cast to one side. But the metals themselves, thus recognized and separated from the dross, should be preserved with the utmost care as priceless spiritual possessions. To become a spiritual alchemist, one must take a very different view of life from that held by the rest of the world. Life and all its experiences must be considered from the inner plane of realities, for realities alone can be raised in intensity of vibration to the plane of spiritual substance and there persist as portions of the immortal spiritual body. So, we began last week by discussing two different ways that we work on purifying these metals. The process of transmutation, again, to transmute something, means to change from one substance or form into another. Basically, in the process of alchemy, the alchemists believed that by bringing all of the metals together in proper proportion, that they could be transmuted into gold. There were material alchemists that worked on attempting to do that with base metals, but the spiritual alchemist attempts to do that with their character.
You mean they combined the many metals? I always thought because lead and gold was just one metal that they were just dealing with the individual metals. What would you have to do to transform copper into gold? What would you have to do to transform mercury?
You'd have to read that, and I've been spending the last 3 months reading these ancient alchemist formulas.
So are they
And
dealing with
the metals individually, or are they glomming them all together and trying to transform that mass into gold?
There is no one single recipe.
Okay.
Or they'd be doing it.
But there, I mean, certainly in modern chemistry, there was a time where there was an experiment done where unstable lead was turned into gold because it was bombarded with radiation enough to, I think, alter the, I'm not a scientist. It was to either alter the number of protons or neutrons or something in that, and they were able to create an isotope of gold. So.
But if enough people turned lead into gold, the gold would lose its value completely.
Yes.
And that was, Shoshana, the concern from the time of Diocletian on, which was about the 4th century. That was a great concern. He was 2nd century. But the Roman emperor was very concerned that if more people were practicing this alchemy that was coming in from Egypt and all of its claims, that it would then alter the economy, that people would have the means by which they could raise armies and therefore go against the emperor. And so alchemical texts were burned and some alchemists were put to death. And this concern also came about during medieval Europe, where the same concern came into place, especially among King Henry VIII of England, who at one point insisted that no alchemy be practiced within his realm because he was concerned it would then alter the whole economic system.
Weren't there some other that had their court alchemist quietly on the side?
Especially in Prague and Vienna. Those were the two cities that were most dedicated to the art. Winnell.
I've always been curious as to why gold, for some reason, is more valuable than anything else.
We'll
Is
talk
it
about
because
that tonight.
of the Egyptian ties, or what? I mean,
It's the rarest.
Yeah, it's the purest.
Well, it has properties that nothing else does. You can pound gold out to a molecule's thickness and read a newspaper through it. It's really malleable and it's non-conductive, and it just behaves differently from any other metal in remarkable ways.
somebody in Australia told me that the Egyptians actually snorted it to have visions.
Well, you can still take colloidal gold
As
and
a
colloidal
medicine,
silver.
right?
And gold is still used in treating rheumatoid arthritis. It's a very expensive treatment, but
It is legitimate.
it is legitimate, yes. And then of course, there were alchemies practiced in the West that come out of Egypt, the Hermetic arts, but also India and China had their own systems of alchemy, similarly related, but of course, uniquely different in the way that those lands are culturally different from the West. But gold, I mean, when I was a teenager, you could still go to the Indian sweet shops and buy sweets that were covered in gold or silver leaf. The price of gold and silver now is so incredibly prohibitive, but it was used in Ayurvedic medicine, and it was believed that eating gold and silver had their benefits. Gerald was talking earlier that, he takes colloidal silver daily, and one can do colloidal gold as well.
I know that gold is also used for making electronics. And quite often people will actually collect electronics and harm themselves greatly with the things that are also, the other things that are inside the electronics to try to get out the gold. Or they'll
Right.
put others to work for them, and it ends up destroying health.
So, an antidote comes to us from both the Latin and Greek. The word is pretty much the same, antidotum, which means to be given as a remedy against something.
Speaking of antidote, Gerald just corrected me. Gold is the best conductor.
It is the most highly conductive of the metals, which is why In the last decade, the Chinese have been pretty much buying up all the gold to use in electronics.
Texas has a huge stash, and that's part of what substantiates its desire for independence, for seceding from the Union.
Don't forget Switzerland.
It would have a better economy than the rest of the country
Uh-huh.
because it's got enough to go back onto the gold standard if it wants.
Excellent. Good for them.
They've never been comfortable with being a step.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they might want to bring slavery back too.
Yeah.
So, in alchemy, what antidotes are specific metals, which we think of as thought cells, which are the elements of the planets. And what happens is they are able to combine energetically with one another in a means that corrects or reconditions the discordant energies in our chart. So these are disparate yet compatible elements. Those combinations are lead and copper, tin and mercury, iron and silver, antidote one another. The metal gold has no antidote, so when we try to correct that, all we can do is apply the process of conversion, which means separating the dross and only allowing the pure metal to express itself. So there's copper and lead, tin and quicksilver, iron and silver. Gold stands alone.
What about platinum?
It wasn't considered one of the planetary metals. I mean, the ancient alchemists used antimony a lot, but it was not identified with a planet, nor was electrum. So there are many other metals out there, but we only use 7 specific metals that have really clear correspondences between the temperament of the metal and the temperament of the planet.
Do you think it means anything if anybody is strongly attracted to any one of those metals?
I do. I believe it is what we would call the law of affinity. Now, understanding what the attraction is takes a little more effort to be able to determine whether one is attracted to that element because the individual has those thought cells strong within their constitution, their stellar constitution or their chart, or whether one is attracted to something because at that period of time you may need it as an antidote to something that's going on in your life. So just as your cat or dog may at certain times of the year be attracted to go outside and eat certain plants, we as humans, if we're at all intuitive with our bodies and our health, are drawn to specific plants. And on Monday I attended an interesting lecture with the Medieval Students Association at UNM. One of my favorite authors and musicians from the 12th century was Hildegard of Bingen, who worked a lot with lapidary medicine. And so there was one of the professors there was actually giving a lecture on her lapidary medicine as well as a concert of her works. And so also there are certain stones that in ancient medicine, Hermetic medicine, were also used that through the wearing or the making of an elixir with that stone could bring a particular vibration into the individual's life that would help.
Different types of quartz are used a lot.
Well, in the ancient world, almost every stone had a correspondence and what was considered to have a healing property. So, let's talk about the safety urges. Where in our soul's experience do we gain this? In the Hermetic system, our philosophy is called the cycle of necessity, that the soul involves into matter and then evolves back to spirit. And in that process, the soul incarnates in mineral, vegetable, animal, human form before moving to astral and spiritual and celestial levels. In other philosophies, primarily Hindu, Buddhist, and some other traditions, there is belief in repeated human rebirth as part of that process. Can one necessarily prove one or the other? No, but
Now, what do they mean by repeated human rebirth anyway?
that you die in this life and you come back reborn
It's
as a
not within
human.
the same life. Okay.
Yes.
Just making sure.
Mhm.
That'd be a little bit strange if it was a physical rebirth within your own.
So what is believed is that certain experiences are stored in the soul from that soul's contact with previous form. So some of the experiences that show the safety urges is there are plants that store water for times of future need. You can especially encounter these if you go down into the Sonoran Desert around Phoenix and Tucson and south, because you encounter these huge saguaro and beryl cactus there. When the monsoon storms come through, those plants have root systems that just pull in all the water, and they have a very waxy, reflective surface, which allows that plant to store water for long periods of time.
Actually, you
Bees.
don't even have to go that far out. The yucca plant, which is very abundant even in the city here,
Mhm.
you can actually survive off of.
Yes, the center heart of that stores a lot of carbohydrates as well. Now, bees, they make and store food for winter. The next time you put honey in your tea, just think bee vomit. Because,
Delicious.
yeah, that's what you're having. And basically, they make honey because in the winter, you don't have at least in climates, temperate climates like this, you do not have the plants blossoming and producing flowers and pollen for them to live off of. They are planning ahead and they are storing up for difficult times. Just watch the squirrels in your neighborhood as they go through your almond trees and start hoarding nuts for winter. We all know people who save for a rainy day, and since most of us don't, back in the previous century, they instituted Social Security as a means to, look after us in those rainy days. Now, the other thing about hoarding, though, is when it becomes compulsive, it is a form of mental illness.
Really rich people.
So, here you can see plants, bees, Scrooge, and hoarders. These are all expressions of the safety urges, or what we might call alchemical lead. You can see that some of these produce experiences in our life that might be considered dross. And there's others which is pure metal because it is what allows for our continued survival. So the safety urges of lead, the element lead, or the role of Saturn in your chart, is for self-preservation. That life itself must survive if that soul is going to gain as many experiences as it possibly can with form and thereby build up its spiritual body and move on.
It's kind of ironic considering how harmful lead can be.
Well, and lead is considered to be one of the most toxic metals, which is why the dross of lead are the hardest things that we can deal with in life. The dross of lead is whenever we have experiences of greed, selfishness, avarice, self-centeredness, covetousness, acquisitiveness, and hoarding. A few more fine qualities could be described as fear, anxiety, dread, apprehension, worry. When we go through periods of depression, melancholy, despair, sorrow, and grief, these are all the dross of lead, the impurities of the planet Saturn. There are also times in our lives where we may experience poverty or lack, deficiencies, hardship, scarcities. And some of the worst of the dross of lead, the highly toxic metal, is when we go through long periods of illness or infirmity, sickness, frailty, debility, and old age are all considered to be the ores of lead. Now, the pure metal of lead, once it's been refined, the way we do this is through cultivating responsibility, conscientiousness, duty, reliability, accountability, and for the Department of Redundancy Department, I have included reliability again. Just in case you didn't get it the first time. Also, positive ores of lead can be experiences with foresight. What's the value of prescience or foresight?
Helps you plan ahead.
The preservation of your life could be dependent on that. So knowing what's going to happen ahead of time allows one to be able to plan and be prepared for that.
It's the reason why people go and get groceries instead of a bunch of alcohol.
Right. And it's the reason why certain religious groups might get 10 years of groceries and save them up.
That's a little...
You know, it's a little overboard, but when Hurricane Katrina came about, the Mormons did a lot more to relieve local stresses than FEMA did at that time because they were prepared. So, you know, regardless of what one thinks about their particular faith, the social services they were able to provide through this sense of foresight, prescience, planning, preparation, organization, structure, and methods.
Also known as preppers.
Preppers?
Preppers, that's the word that people use to describe somebody who takes and sets aside some food or shelter for a rainy day or a time in which there might be need for it.
Okay, so the positive qualities would be being a prepper. So, this expresses through creating for ourselves a sense of safety, security, protection, caution, prudence, and vigilance. Now, even the positive qualities of lead, there are a few of these words here that are going to make you giddy, right? Ooh, duty and responsibility. Vigilance, planning. No. But that's as good as it gets with lead. Because these, again, these are all qualities that we have to have built into our nature if we're actually going to survive this thing called life. So, what we do when we're applying alchemy to progress charts is we know that whenever we have a progression to Saturn, you can almost be guaranteed that it will be accompanied by extra work, responsibility, and economy or loss, and or experiences of great duty and great responsibility. And then the really good news is, yeah, or more.
That sounds horrible.
Yeah, it can be. Which is why we talk about lead first, being the most base of the metals. It's the one that we have to really learn to master head on.
It's taken me all this time to learn to master master it, believe me.
Have you done it yet?
Yes, I have.
Oh, good. I think it would actually be impossible for me to master something like that, considering I'm just turning 17 in
Of
a
course,
week.
there's ups and downs. I call them ups and downs.
Now, I think of it. Lead is one of the most toxic of metals. It is one of the heaviest. And what do we talk about? People who are depressed, we talk about them as being heavy.
Unless you're using 1980s slang. Heavy,
In
man.
which case you're a bummer.
Yeah. So, now, no, it's not all that bad, unless it poisons you. No. Unless you end up like, well, even Scrooge. Scrooge had a spiritual revelation. If you read Dickens and his Christmas Carol, which I find to be one of the most marvelous stories of human redemption, it took the spirit world to sort of wake him up, but it happened. Okay, let's talk about copper. Where do we get social urges, which is what copper or the planet Venus governs? Some planets have learned to cross-pollinate. Plants. Yeah, I imagine some planets cross-pollinate too. Yeah, drop the E. There are other plants which create the most beautiful blooms. This ensures their propagation. What did these plants do? They got human beings hooked. So that we are ensuring their propagation because we so love them that we keep reproducing them in our gardens.
Oh, and they got bees hooked and hummingbirds hooked.
Yeah, they're getting the whole of God's creation hooked.
Bright colors will attract almost all creatures.
There are certain animals which mate for life and that just cannot bear to be parted from one another. If you've ever had a mourning dove in your garden that has lost its mate, it's heartbreaking.
They keep calling for 'em.
Yeah.
So they got their name, huh? It's mourning, M-O-U-R-N, right?
Yeah. There are animals that have found that their survival is benefited through living in herds. Humans, as social animals, seek companionship. There you have it, pollinating plants, which make us so crazy at this time of year.
What about the agoraphobic humans?
They're sick.
Okay.
That is a creature known as those are the mourning doves. Here are herd animals and humans.
That will stop your car in Yellowstone.
Now, the dross of copper is a very interesting metal because when it oxidizes, it forms these green oxides, which we know as verdigris. They are used in gardens for killing things such as snails. They're used by fishermen to paint on the bottom of boats to keep barnacles from attaching. So copper ores, too, can be highly poisonous. One is certainly the French use a lot of copper cookware, though most of it is lined with tin. Because if you cook with acids in copper, it leaches out the copper, which eventually becomes toxic. Yes?
I just realized something. Copper is the antidote to lead, right? Well, quite often whenever somebody finds a penny, which are made of copper, on the ground, they'll consider it to be lucky and bring them good fortune.
Find a penny, pick it up, and
Yeah.
all the day you'll have good luck.
Yeah.
That was the saying from my childhood. Because
So
copper
do you think
is...
those two could be related, or is it just a
Well, no,
coincidence?
coppers are considered lucky because Venus in astrology is the lesser benefic. She brings good fortune.
Sweet.
But even the planet Venus can have experiences of feeling unloved. Has anyone ever been lonely or mourning over the loss of the companionship? I mean, almost everybody gets that experience in life.
Part of the human experience.
Yes.
Impossible not to.
Losses in friendship can bring about a similar feeling, as can jealousies. Other qualities which is considered the dross of copper, if Venus is afflicted in one's chart or under progressed aspects to Venus, one can also be dealing with the qualities of pliancy, which is the inability to say no or the disease to please, always wanting to make the other person happy. It can also bring about addictions or over sensuality. And it corresponded to the the vice of sloth, among the 7 deadly vices. Venus can make us lazy. Now, the pure metal of copper, see the symbol, Cu? That actually, in the ancient world, most of the copper was mined in a nation that has been in the news a lot this last week, Cyprus. Cu is for Kupres, which was the ancient name for Cyprus, whose economy is falling apart right now. But copper, that comes from argent. Aurum, which is gold. Argent is silver, as in Argentina.
Okay, I was always curious about that.
When we talk of someone's aura, we're talking about that gold field that extends out from them, that field of light. So, with experiences of copper, we cultivate unconditional love. We work at giving affection. We work at making our relationships easier rather than more complicated and strife-filled. The other way to cultivate the pure ores of copper in your life is to create beauty and comfort in your environment, and then to share it with other people. Art. So, any progressed aspect of Venus affects our emotions, our social relations, and our artistic appreciation. And sadly, major progressions of Venus only last for about 180 days.
What happens if
But that's long enough to fall in love.
And get separated.
And get separated, right. Long enough to have a crush and break up.
or for nothing to happen at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's long enough for that.
Now, copper is also considered to be the metal for Neptune. And so any progressed aspect of Neptune increases our imagination, our sensitivity, but also tends to attract schemes into our lives. Lead is the antidote to copper. So if you think about it, just as copper, or cultivating beauty and aesthetics and love and goodwill, antidote the selfishness and or the hoarding tendencies, the self-absorption of lead. Lead, which is the quality of cultivating duty, responsibility, foresight, is the antidote to copper, whose natural tendencies can be towards laziness or pliancy or just giving in. The lead causes you to stand up to the condition that you might otherwise yield to.
Christopher?
Yes.
In the notes here, it says that a transit or a progression of Venus lasts approximately 18 months. Not 180 days. 18 months.
Okay, let's see, 18 months, which would
180
be,
days would be about 6 months.
you are correct. It
So-
is,
Maybe we got more time
Yeah, a
now.
little more
Yeah.
elbow room.
you're right, it is 18 months, yeah, a year and a half. Same with Mercury.
18 months.
Supposedly, the feeling of love comes after about 4 months of infatuation.
Huh? I don't know what's up.
3 months. 3 months was when I noticed.
Yeah, usually we say 3 months.
Turning to get real.
Yeah, the first 90 days is considered the honeymoon period. And then after that, one sees the whole picture, not just the idealized partner. They start to see you get to see the faults, the frailties, the shortcomings, the nose hairs.
With a 2x4. I don't think he likes me.
Yeah, we start to get it after 3 months.
All right, alchemical tin corresponds in the soul to the religious urges of Jupiter. Some plants create an abundance of seeds. Why? They're optimistic. One of these is bound to take root.
They also inherently know the poor chances of
Survival.
proliferation.
Yes.
Right.
Seeds and nuts store food for future growth. And quite often, seeds and nuts store it in an oily form. And Jupiter governs the fat in the body. Wolves, dogs will defer to a pack leader. They will select one among them. Elephants will do the same, as well as other herding animals will select one among the herd or the pack that they have an inherent faith that in a pickle, that animal will lead them out of the problem or the hardship.
Or it can just kick their butts if they try to refuse.
That too. Domesticated animals. I am a deity to my dog who has absolute faith that I will feed him every day.
Worship me, puppy.
And who's worshiping who?
Yeah, that is the
You are
daily
feeding
question.
him every day, aren't you?
Uh-huh.
With cats, it's pretty much unquestionable. The cat's the deity there.
True.
Dogs, I love you.
Yes, I always thought cats were an alien race that came to Earth to enslave man.
Actually, you know, it's kind of interesting. Did you know that whenever people were fighting the Egyptians, they would often put cats on the outsides of their shields because an Egyptian could not kill a cat? Same with the Grecians. They wouldn't kill cats.
I heard a theory that every so often you meet a cat who's a walk-in, who is a station for aliens to be observing us. They live with us in our daily lives. They watch our every habit. And I have 2 cats.
And then they
one of
transmit
them
it back
is-
to the mothership.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Maybe
One
my
of
dog
my
just
cats
listens
is
to you.
just an absolutely ordinary, normal, not dim-witted, but ordinary cat. And the other one, I know he is taking
Up to something.
reporting home.
Communication is going on.
So here's an image of the abundance of seeds. Pack animals, domesticated animals. Some people have faith that their authorities will make right choices for them. And there are some people who inspire others to benevolent action.
Yeah. It's a great picture in front of the Star of Solomon.
Now, even tin has its dross. primarily tin, when it encounters freezing temperatures, tends to decompose. During the Middle Ages, tin was used widely on roofing materials, and there were tin blights that would take place in different medieval villages where it would appear that the tin would become diseased and move from one roof to another.
I'm sure that wouldn't be much of an issue in a place like New Mexico, though.
Yeah, the low moisture, though the freezing temperatures here. So the negative or the dross of tin can be conceit, snobbery, pretentiousness, or condescension. It can express as a holier-than-thou attitude, religious fanaticism, or religious extremism. On less annoying levels, it can still express as being overly optimistic, excessive generosity, naivety, or a laissez-faire attitude. You know, just let it happen. It can also, the dross of tin can lead to excess, overindulgence, or gluttony. Pure tin, however, expresses as devotion, reliance on a higher power, the qualities of spirituality or prayerfulness, through human action as generosity, goodwill, charity, benevolence, munificence, compassion, and sharing. The qualities of optimism, buoyancy, cheerfulness, hopefulness, gratitude, thankfulness. These are all qualities that we can cultivate to make us feel better about what the future may have in store for us. And it tends to attract abundance, wealth, affluence, and prosperity. Tin is one of the most recycled metals. In medieval Europe, there were men that went around, primarily in gypsy wagons. They were called tinkers, or tinkers. And they would constantly collect tin objects from people's homes and then smelt them into new objects.
They would tinker with them.
They would tinker with them.
Oh, yay, I learned
So, Jupiter. Any progressed aspect of Jupiter affects the individual through abundance, increased optimism, and joviality. And progressed aspects of Jupiter last for about 11 years. That's when Jupiter is aspecting another planet. If it's another planet aspecting Jupiter in your chart, then it's whatever the length of time. If it's 18 months for Mercury and Venus, or 2 years for the Sun, or 3 to 4 years for Mars. Yeah. Sometimes 12, depending on what speed Jupiter moves at. Now, the antidote to tin is Mercury, the intellectual urges. These levels of awareness were developed in early life form. Some plants are sensitive to their environments. Insects have to have memory to get back to their homes. Birds have annual migrations, as do butterflies, to different parts of the world where they need to successfully get to their winter feeding grounds or breeding grounds. Animals need to find their way back to water and or to communicate to one another in times of danger. Here, this is a planet called Mimosa. It's also referred to as the sensitive plant.
Plant.
Yeah, plant. So if you touch it, the leaves will recoil.
Wow.
These are, yes, beehives. These are monarch butterflies down in the state of Michoacan in Mexico, where they go every year. Annual migrations of birds and herding animals that move across the savanna. So that's, in early life forms, we gain these qualities of memory and communication. The dross of Mercury expresses as poor communication skills, errors in spelling or inaccuracies in calculation. Those things can hurt you. If you mix up a plant with a planet, you're in bad shape. It can attract experiences of nervousness, restlessness, uneasiness, anxiety, neuroses, mental imbalance, and mental ruminations. Anybody feeling crazy right about now?
How about all the time?
So, is it that Mercury is mixed in with a lot of other stuff that makes that a solid stone there?
The ores of Mercury, they're primarily found in a stone called cinnabar. And it is. I believe it's mixed up with sulfur.
Not at all
Yes.
related to Cinnabon.
No, not cinnabon. Though both might be toxic if ingested in large enough amounts. Now, like lead, mercury is considered to be a highly toxic metal. When I was a child, you had no trouble getting lead or mercury. We would play with it. We would touch it. We would, Now it is a carefully guarded substance that is not easy to come by. Yes, it was used. That's why around many mining sites, the ground is highly toxic because mercury was used in the process of separating gold from the other ores.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, except they have children do it in third world countries.
That's not cool.
Whole families by hand exposing themselves.
More coming though.
It's an unbelievable.
And mercury poisoning will bring absent-mindedness, forgetfulness, and poor concentration.
So
It used to be known as Mad Hatter's disease because the fullers in England and other parts of Europe used mercury as part of the felting process.
They put in their teeth and fillings.
Yes, most of us here are old enough to have had mercury amalgam, because mercury has this ability, whether heated or cold, to mix with other metals. And so back in the 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, it was very popular to use mercury amalgams with silver for filling teeth. And then it would leach into your body for the rest of your life as a heavy metal.
I don't think it just causes those mental phenomena either. It makes people profoundly ill.
You die before it takes effect.
No, but you can die of it.
Yes.
But you sure know it's taken effect.
Yeah, there was one city in Japan, I forget which one it was. It was one of the coastal towns where there, from the industrial waste, a lot of mercury had gone out into the harbor, yet they continued to fish the harbor, and mercury builds up in the food chain, basically. And there was high prevalence of mercury poisoning in this Japanese town.
Well, they still say we shouldn't eat too much tuna.
There's
All over the world,
Right.
especially pregnant women.
Yes, it is at the top of the food chain in the ocean, and so it just...
India used to make medicine out of mercury.
And in China, that was...
Yeah.
This
China
is
also.
huge. That is no chicken of the sea.
They still put it in with injections like shots.
They
Flu
take
shots
true
have
people.
mercury in them.
Good thing I never take my shots.
Because Because it preserves the biological makeup.
Well, and as toxic as it is,
They kill you, but reserves that are.
It also has medicinal values as well, and it's a matter of getting the right combination. Yeah.
So we can have our homeopathic dose of mercury.
That might be the best level on which to take it.
I don't want it.
Where did it get HG?
At the moment, I'm forgetting.
Succinctly, when did succinctly get in there for mercury? Loquaciously. Wordily.
Good communication skills.
Mercury's the messenger of the gods?
Mercury was the messenger, and so Mercury is our ability to critique, to evaluate, to analyze information. It expresses through perception, awareness, mental acuity, through being observant or being alert. So any progressed aspect of Mercury affects our mental interest, the faculty or accuracy of our expression, and it increases our cerebral activity. So in observing your chart under Mercury aspects, chances are these are times you're going to study. These are times you're going to be learning things.
Or writing.
Or involved in expressing yourself, teaching, writing, communicating. And like Venus, Mercury progressions last for 18 months, a year and a half. Now, Uranus is considered the upper octave of Mercury. Just as Mercury governs the brain and the nervous system, Uranus is that higher brain that functions through extension of consciousness. And any progressed Uranus aspects brings changes into our lives, and generally through human agencies. Tin is the antidote to Mercury. Mercury is the antidote to tin. So think about it. With tin, the dross of tin, these are periods where we are being overly optimistic. We may be thinking excessively or fanatically. When you apply Mercury to that, which is through logic, reason, being able to critique, analyze, evaluate, it helps bring you back to earth. So instead of just thinking, oh, if I invest in 4-leaf clovers, I'm going to make $1 million, Mercury steps in and says, okay, each 4-leaf clover might get you 25 cents of profit, and the local demographic is such that only 3% of the population is going to buy these. In a city of 700,000, this is the amount of money you can make.
Reminds me of when I was a kid and I used to go hunt for 4-leaf clovers in my backyard. I also tried to find iron. Took the magnets off the refrigerator and started putting them in the sand.
Good science experiments. Now, on the other hand, what are the dross of Mercury? I mean, neuroses, anxiety. Has anyone in this room ever woken up at 2 a.m. and started to fixate on something that they actually couldn't fix at that time of day? Hey. Yeah. So what you have to do in that case is switch to tin, which is feelings of optimism or connecting to a higher power, moving into a state of devotion or prayerfulness. This, I can't fix this myself. My finite mind does not have all the answers. I have to lift it up to infinite mind to draw in the answers I need. Or I need to just have faith that there is a benevolent deific force out there that really doesn't want me to spend all of my life suffering and can bring to me what I need.
We'll start doing the tarot and, what do you call it, admonitions?
Although not all people do that. For example, atheists don't do that.
Well, they may not believe in a higher power, but they could still think optimistically. See, one doesn't have to believe in God to think optimistically, because one might actually have faith in other human beings, too. There are some atheists that may not, again, they're non-deistic, but I've met atheists who have an inherent belief in morality or in the goodness of humans being able to make the right choices. So you incorporate whatever you can within the parameters of your belief systems.
Adolf Hitler wanted to be a priest.
And an artist.
Yeah. Actually, I'm kind of sad that he didn't get to become an artist because I kind of like his paintings.
Yeah, he had talent. So Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, he had some pretty good paintings. Surprisingly, they weren't racist. It was mostly just backgrounds and stuff.
All right, let's talk about the aggressive urges, or alchemical iron. Yeah, some plants, I mean, we've all encountered them in our gardens or other people's. These plants that produce protection.
Every rose has its thorns.
Every rose has its thorns. And why? Because it is such a beautiful, delicate, sweet-smelling plant that other creatures would be devouring it if they could have access to it. Those succulent cactus that store the water in the desert also are prime targets for other species to eat, which is why they have developed spines. Insects, in order to protect themselves, develop stingers and venom. Animals, horns, teeth, and claws, killing in defense. There are animals that have developed venom, especially among the vipers of different types.
Insects as well.
There are certain animals that, in order to have breeding rights, will fight to the death. That's a huge effort just to spread your DNA out into the world.
Walruses will do that, so will elephant seals.
And rams.
Humans develop tools to obtain food or to create shelter. We also developed weapons to defend our territory. So there's some Opuntia cactus with prickly pear fruit. I can't see what that is. Okay, a stickery, thorny rose. Here's a bee or yellow jacket. And what have we? Claws. Teeth.
Yawning wolf.
We have teeth and claws. Here are 2 rams in rutting season.
3, actually.
Okay. You sure one isn't the ewe?
Yeah.
And what have we here? Okay, they're dead. Why? Because they locked horns and then they could no longer function or eat. Here we are with our tools and martial arts. So the dross of iron, if you think about it, iron is the metal that's used to make either tools or weapons. The positive quality of transmuting or converting iron is the concept of beating swords into plowshares, transforming tools or weapons into tools.
Or the other way around.
But iron is a metal that oxidizes very quickly and into a fiery red color. So Mars represents those qualities of anger, aggression, violence, hostility, cruelty, brutality, bloodlust. Strife, rage, fury, destructiveness, resentment, and antagonism are just a few of the dross of iron.
I know a woman like that.
You still dating? Okay.
I've never known any man like that.
I ended up shot, my throat cut and stabbed 27 times.
Okay.
No, it's 37 times in the chest.
Impulsiveness, impetuosity, rashness, hot-headedness, recklessness. None of us have met men like that. Lust, desire, longing, addiction, misdirected passions. As I always say, the prisons are filled with persons who have, yes, with a lot of rust. They have poor impulse control, and that is why they ended up there. And Mars is responsible for the majority of that.
Oops.
Now, the pure metal is when we are active, dynamic, energetic, initiative, when we are motivated. It has to do with building up rather than tearing down, being constructive, productive, industrious, protective, defensive, and expresses best through self-control and carefully directed passions. So any progressed aspect of Mars tends to bring strife, haste, and increased expenditures of energy. And they last anywhere from 3 to 4 years when Mars is progressing in a chart.
Christopher, we've seen both sides of the iron, the dross and the pureness. And why, in a progression, do we only see more of the dross side?
Because Mars is the lesser malefic and is responsible for 1/4 discord. So unless in your natal chart Mars is miraculously harmonious, chances are, regardless of the aspect of Mars, you're going to get this. This is what's on the menu. It's up to you to know about it ahead of time and decide that you're going to build up rather than tear down. Your focus will be on being constructive rather than destructive. That rather than being impulsive and impetuous, you'll actually think before acting, especially when you're mad.
You need to learn
That's
to
hard to
direct
do.
your energy.
Carefully directed passions. Again, we can't accomplish anything in life without passion.
But if it wasn't for Mars, we wouldn't have the initiative power to create or do anything.
Mars is the musculature of the body, without which we don't have movement.
Gotta have energy too.
We don't have energy.
Right.
So,
Just stay in bed all day. Actually, sounds rather appealing.
the antidote to iron is silver, which is the domestic urges of the soul, or the moon as a planet. Now, some plants endow their seeds with means of finding new, favorable environments. Birds build nests as protective places for their offspring. Animals build lairs and dens. Animals protect their young. Both animals and humans nourish their offspring. Here are samaras of the maple tree. And they are so designed to be whirligigs that the wind comes along, separates them from the tree, and they can move at a distance from the tree, land in a moist crevice somewhere, and start another tree. Acorns can do the same. Bird nest. Here's a beaver den. This is a marsupial, a kangaroo, and they take care of their young.
Did you know when you set a pine cone on fire, it releases the seeds into the air?
Which is why that's how forests restore themselves, is through...
Why they occasionally do controlled fires.
I can't see what this is. Can anyone just... Okay. The seahorse are unique in that the male actually nurtures the young. And if you ever go to State Fair, one of my favorite sights is the big old sow with the piglets. And you just have to remind yourself that those cute piglets do grow up into...
Actually, they kind of scare me.
And this is a medieval image of the lactating virgin. These were very popular in the Middle Ages. In fact, the oldest, I think the oldest Catholic shrine in the United States is the Virgen de la Leche in St. Augustine, Florida, who is a lactating virgin.
I've never seen a picture of that.
Well, you know, they stem from the images of Isis, who was oftentimes pictured seated and feeding Horus, her son. And this image just became very popular among the Romans and then into Christianity. The lactating virgin became a very popular thing.
Judging by the look on baby Jesus' face, I don't think he likes it too much.
Oh, something else there's an angel or a monkey over here that got his attention, so you know how distracted. He heard the puppy next door.
That's kind of scary.
Huh. So the dross of silver. Silver is one of those metals that tarnishes quickly. Our job as children, whenever we were going to have company, is we had to polish the silver before the meal.
But if you didn't have silver?
Then you didn't have to polish it. But silver is one of those metals that's considered very healing, which is why our word plate actually means silver. It comes from the Latin plata, which is the word for silver. So, silver was commonly used for service, for food service, because...
It won't erode away in water.
What's that?
It won't erode away in water. Like, for example, whenever the Titanic sunk, right, the silver that was on the ship, it's still there and it's still intact.
Yeah, it just has corroded because of the presence of salt. Now, the negative quality, or the dross of silver, silver oxidizes black. So, the negative quality of the moon is that we can become moody, sulky, glum, petulant, temperamental. When I was a child, these things were referred to as one was having a bad humor. Negative lunar qualities can be being passive, submissive, compliant, docile, or meek. As I always say, don't mind me, I'll just sit here in the dark. It can make one negative, pessimistic, or downbeat. This is all the dross of silver. Also, one can be fickle, inconsistent, changeable, capricious, or vacillating. Gossipy, scandalous, or a rumor monger. So, now the pure metal of silver is bright and shiny, almost white in color. It's so bright. And what we do to stimulate that is we cultivate harmonious moods and feelings. Music is ruled by the moon and can be used to uplift one's moods. The other thing we can learn is how to care for other life forms. Water your plant. Feed your cat. We can in life nurture the less fortunate. There are abused children or seniors that may need help, or persons who don't have as great of access to resources as the rest of us do that need help at different times in their lives.
What about the people who would rather take care of their garden than their children?
Then hopefully they have godparents or co-parents for their children.
I know some dogs that are smarter than children. I had two standing in the rain and the dog was in the back under the porch.
Well, maybe they love the rain.
So, any aspects to the moon affects our mental attitude, domestic life, and our everyday affairs. Major progressions of the moon last approximately 50 to 60 days. Estimate about 2 months for a moon progression. Pluto impacts us. The moon impacts us through the family. Pluto is the larger family. It is the group. It's the community.
Is it the higher octave
It is.
Yeah.
Mars is the antidote to silver. So when you want to say, no, I'll just sit here in the dark, Mars comes along and gets out the stepladder, unwraps the light bulb, and replaces it. Mars moves into action. That is the antidote to the moon passivity. And likewise, the moon, the ores of silver, are the antidote to iron. When you are feeling aggressive or angry or want to reach out and slap someone, the antidote is to actually be nurturing. And if you need to be strident, then you find a cause that you can become an activist behind, but so that your energies are being expressed passionately but constructively.
So you're not a rebel without a cause.
Right.
Is moon more compassionate than, say, Venus?
Yes. Because the moon, if you think about it, when we looked at the experiences of the moon, it was all about ensuring that the next generation survives through the building of the nest, the lair, the den, the feeding of the offspring, the making sure that the offspring, the seeds of the plant, will go at a great enough distance from the parent plant in order to be able to reproduce themselves. So that's the nature of the moon, is to think in its most positive qualities almost entirely about the other. And that's why Pluto, as the upper octave of silver, has to do with universal welfare, of thinking not just for the individual needs, but for what's going to be for the welfare of the entire group. Or as Native Americans oftentimes speak about, what's going to be there for the seventh generation forward. All right. Alchemical gold. This is the power urges. There are plants which have enough vitality to live for thousands of years. I don't think they live that long, but you can't get rid of them.
Jellyfish and lobsters will actually live for an extremely long amount of time if they're not killed first. It's not exactly known how long they will live, but they actually haven't put a date on their actual lifespan if not killed.
Interesting. Stallions dominate herds. Male lions protect the pride. Humans assign status based on bloodlines or on special ability. And there are advantages to be gained from being the authority or from being close to the authority. So here's a sequoia that can live for 1,000 or more years. Or, yeah, it's either a queen bee or queen termite. No, it's a bee. Yep. Yeah, not every... She's called the queen because she's the royalty. And in the hive, only the queen is allowed to reproduce. If there is a second queen born within a hive, they will fight to the death.
Yeah.
There's a queen termite. Or, yes, the other can fly out with a swarm. And
Queen termite's kind of ugly.
yeah.
That looks like a cool marriage.
Is that Thailand?
That is the king and queen of Thailand. So, we speak of gold as being the gold standard. Laura was describing earlier how it can be hammered to, I forget, 1 ounce of gold can be hammered to something like a square mile of gold leaf. It is ductile. Gold never corrodes. So, truly on the Titanic, they can find the gold objects there because they have never, unlike the silver and the iron and the brass and the copper, it never oxidizes. It is resistant to corrosion.
Has anybody been to the Titanic exhibit yet?
Now, you know what's kind of an interesting thought? What would happen if, say, somebody took some purified gold and wrote a message in it to be found by people thousands of years later? Do you think we would still be able to read it?
They wouldn't believe it.
Couldn't believe it, but let's just say something like that could happen.
Well, that doesn't depend on the gold, that depends on if language had changed much.
Yeah, because throughout history, gold has been used for jewelry, charms, and other things, which...
You can get bounced around though, it's kind of soft. If it's pure gold, it's quite soft.
Which is why it's oftentimes alloyed with copper or silver to
Make
create
it a little harder.
the lower carats of gold, which makes it harder. But gold is another one of those metals that's been recycled, and pretty much we still use all the same gold that has been in use for the last few centuries. There's not been that much more gold added to the gold reserves around the world.
There's strong theory that all the gold that we have on Earth was brought here through comets and asteroids. That it's import to planet Earth. And then recently they discovered that, I think it was deep in the bowels of volcanoes that gold could be created. So there is some creation of gold that goes on Earth, but a lot of it apparently was deposited here.
I'm proud what if Scientologists are right.
They have lots of theories.
I saw the world's largest open gold pit in Kalgoorlie in Australia. And they literally, it's a beautiful 1880s town, and they literally lob it off if they find more gold. And so, this was in 2005 or 6. And so I was at the hostel, and all these kids were working, these young men were working in the gold mines from England and Japan and all over to make a bunch of money so they could go travel, because they have no safety things with it. You can do a drill for 16 hours a day. But the whole end result, when you go to do the little tour, is you only get, it looks like a dump truck, like a garbage dump truck. They only get 6 of these out of that place a year, working 24 hours a day.
Wow.
And that's when I got the idea, why in the world is this so important? It's like, and I'm not talking about a big dump truck, I'm just talking about, by the time they filter it down and everything.
Well,
A storage bin.
in the ancient world, there are metals that are rarer than gold, but gold is considered to be very rare. But primarily it's because it is incorruptible. It is the color of the sun. The ancients really saw it as something of great value, and
And as a 6-year-old girl would put it, pretty!
yes. So the positive ores of gold are when we have the proper use of power, authority, self-esteem, self-worth, confidence. It's both self-respect and respect of others. The best way to cultivate the ores of gold is to develop the habit system of taking pride in everything you do. When you've done a job well, let yourself know it. Any progressed aspect of the sun affects vitality, significance, and our relationships to authority, or our standing as an authority in our world. Solar progressions last for 2 years. There's a year when the aspect enters, before it becomes perfect, and then a year as it separates. So, we're actually going to not do this is something you can do at home. What I'm going to do is switch now to looking at progressions. And we're going to look at a chart of a notable person whose birthday was last week.
So first of all, if you're a person, like I've always been much more attracted to gold than silver, does that mean sun is more powerful in your chart than moon?
It might, or it might mean that it's harmonious in your chart and the moon's discordant.
Oh,
Or you could have a dearth of sun power in your chart.
Right, and you may feel like you need to,
need it.
if it's your weakest planet, you might feel like you need to build that in. So, this is,
Wow, look at that Jupiter on this
okay. Do we have the right?
side.
Oh, okay, I was going to say, do we have the right chart? Well, what do you know about Jupiter? Well, Jupiter is also the planet of humor. And this is the chart of a comedian. This is Rosie O'Donnell. So, having Jupiter on the midheaven, it's curious that, before she became a spokesperson on The View, she actually worked the majority of her career as a comedian, and that's how we know her. So, curiously, though, Mercury is the most powerful planet in this chart, having 14% of her power. Jupiter is second in power. Well, if you look at your handouts, unless it's too small, it could be too small. Okay. Here, if you press this button, and then this one will sort it by power. I may need to do it horizontally. So you can see, Mercury has 14% of the power. Jupiter is a close second at 12.8%. If we sort it by harmony, Jupiter is the most harmonious planet in the chart. So, but let's do some progressions. I'm going to progress the chart to March 17th, 1973. So we go to Tools, progress the chart. Yes, it is St. Patrick's Day.
73, what happened to her then?
Her mother died of breast cancer just 4 days before her 11th birthday.
Right up there, yeah.
Moon moving into conjunction with the... We might need to look for Saturn aspects, since Saturn rules the 8th house of death.
That's actually kind of sad.
And the progressed midheaven, which governs the mother, was forming a semi-sextile to the progressed Saturn in the chart. So we have an aspect involving the 10th house of the mother and the 8th house of death, just shortly, right around her 11th birthday.
And you have Pluto opposing it, opposing the midheaven.
Yes, and again, so there's an event.
Fourth house.
This is 4th house of home, family, living environment,
And then Uranus
and
is
the
opposing-
family's being torn apart over this event, or it's expressing as a great...
Uranus is opposite the moon in Leo, conjunct the fourth house.
I'm curious though what kind of effect it must have had on her, because she's got Jupiter conjunct Jupiter. Do you know what I mean? Progressed Jupiter is within orb.
No,
Okay.
it has to be within 1 degree of
It's
orb.
not within 1 degree?
No, this
just
is 1 degree and
Something
20
else.
some odd.
Oh, what's in 2 degrees?
But yes, somebody pointed out the major progressed moon is in opposition with progressed Uranus. The moon is also represents the mother or mother figures, and an opposition is a separation. Uranus is the planet of...
Being is the higher octave of the moon in the 4th house. So
So now,
no, it's not.
Saturn
no,
represents
no.
the mother? The way you look at things?
The midheaven.
Uranus is
Midheaven
The
And the 10th house in Hermetic astrology is the mother, the 4th house is the father,
Okay,
and the family in general.
okay, so that's,
The way this was determined is actually after a few decades of studies, the Church of Light Research Department determined that by progression, the death of the mother was always signified by a progression involving the 10th house and the 8th house, and the father, the 4th house and the 8th house.
interesting, okay.
So we can see that that constant holds up in this chart. There is an aspect between the midheaven, the cusp of the 10th house, and Saturn, the ruler of the 8th house. Now, her nickname used to be the Queen of Nice. I think that's before she did The View.
Wait, and what was the death of the father? Which house?
4th house.
She must have converted that one.
Yes, she received a $3 million advance for her first memoir, which was called Find Me.
The 4th house.
And she used that money to establish a foundation called For All Kids.
See, so
Now let's go to 1996.
8th house is actually Mercury. Or
And let's see, let's turn that to September, because I think the Emmys are in September. So in 1996, she started hosting the Rosie O'Donnell Show, which won multiple Emmy Awards. Now, for awards, we're either looking to the midheaven, planets in the 10th house of recognition and fame, or progressed aspects of the sun. So, curiously, we have the major progressed moon forming a trine to the major progressed sun in September of 1996.
Semi-sextile to Mars.
in the house of, you know.
And yes, a semi-sextile, Mars at 4 degrees Aries to the sun at 4 degrees Taurus. So the sun is the planet of authority, recognition, awards, honors, and Mars is the co-ruler of the 10th house of fame and career.
Doesn't Mars and Jupiter sometimes indicate luck?
And the progressed moon is 4 degrees Capricorn, is trying
The
sun.
progressed sun.
Yeah. And we have
And then we have the midheaven is actually out of orb
yeah.
from a conjunction to the sun.
But the Emmys come after. You know, she may have already done the brilliant thing.
True, and it could have been something that was leading up to that. The midheaven, let's see, 2.6 to 3.44. It's also out of orb from an opposition to the moon. But who knows, if she got some the following year. Nevertheless, I have had friends get Emmys when the midheaven, two friends had the sun in the 5th house, and when the midheaven moved up to oppose that, they both won Emmys. Normally we'd think, oh, it's an opposition, this is going to be something terrible, but it was actually a polarizing experience that brought them recognition or fame.
Well, it's an aspect of, from an amateur being progressed to, you know, higher standing than whatever.
All right, now in 2006, 10 years later, she became a spokesperson for a show called The View. I watched it a couple of times. It was mostly a roundtable discussion of sort of celebrity women from opposing points of political viewpoints that were getting cranky with one another.
Well, the crankiness from Rosie O'Donnell comes because Mars is conjunct her midheaven, and within 5 minutes of a perfect conjunction.
And probably, who knows, I think it was within
she-
5 shows,
And over the years,
she
I've
lost
seen
her contract.
I've seen her. She becomes
AKA
more
PMS hour.
aggressive.
Yes.
To
She became very bellicose
Yeah,
towards the
right.
conservative commentators on
Right.
this show. And it actually became a very, think Mars, antagonistic
Yeah, like a
situation.
sextile to Saturn in the 11th or in the 9th house.
Wasn't her humor always kind of that way too?
Like it's a
Kind of-
baseball game.
Acerbic. Or,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But basically that year, not only did she become a moderator, but they also had a mutual agreement to cancel her contract.
Yeah.
So that was
Why?
That's
Mars
interesting.
midheaven conjunction.
Yeah.
I'm guessing she felt a little bit degraded by something like that.
Well, she could be kind
I
of.
mean, she seems kind of like a very strong and funny woman, but then you put her on
There's
something
an
like that, and
underlying,
it's
there's
kind
an
of...
underlying aggression.
Yes, there is an underlying aggression in her, but I'm saying something like The View is more like a three-ring circus, you
Right.
know? It would be a
Well, I
little bit
think there's an
humiliating.
underlying vulnerability in her too.
Yeah, but
Didn't
she
she-
uses her aggressive,
Uh-huh.
aggressiveness
Yeah,
to,
cross that way.
Yeah.
to
But
Right.
she had heart trouble, and she came out about it and decided to educate women about, signs of heart attacks that they might not be aware of through her experience.
Well, look at the 12th house.
yeah, the sun in the 12th house
Uh-huh.
of hospitals.
Self-undoing.
Wonder what year her heart attack was in.
That I didn't find any
last year.
information
Yeah, it
on.
was recent.
Last year.
12,
yeah.
Okay.
Right.
The following year, we can see Mars and the midheaven are still conjunct.
Mhm.
She released her second memoir, the name of which is Celebrity Detox. And it focused on her struggles with fame, as well as her time at The View.
Huh.
And
And the
So
ego
it is
deaths
that.
involved in it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Neptune in the 6th house is let me see, a square with Uranus or with Saturn in the 9th house.
Right, progress Saturn, squaring Neptune.
Her idealism, which might be, the reason for her producing or writing another book.
And even though her viewpoints may have been suppressed on the show by being silenced, she found a way, 9th house of
To express
expression,
herself,
through
right.
publishing.
Right. Which was her ideal, probably.
Basically, you don't like my opinion. Okay, somebody else will.
Yeah.
So,
So there's
Interesting.
Interesting.
a fine example of progressions in action. Any questions on this?
You sure
Mars
like to be an
is-
astrologer.
Yeah.
Mars is still opposed to Pluto. It's 1 minute beyond actual opposition. Mars opposed Pluto. That seems like a detoxing kind of effect if you use it well.
Also notice that Pluto is in retrograde there.
That's in her chart.
So she feels with one of the inner levels rather than.
The fourth house has to do with home and family life, and she came out fairly late
And
as a
married.
lesbian.
She adopted a child.
Married and adopted, and primarily she works now with lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered families doing
Right.
tours and cruises, where they're also able to get entertainment and education and be able to meet other alternative families, you know,
Well,
where
yeah, she's got all that Sun and Venus in the 11th house, which is
probably great for cruise
cruise
ship
and
direction.
community and people who think about the whole and Uranus, and I always think of Uranus with alternative ways to do it.
And actually, the gay community is a pretty fun community to be around.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, I found a lot of times, like during Pride Day, they end up being very energetic, very loving, very accepting people. I've got a lot of gay friends, you know, and I go to Pride to support them.
Right on.
Oh, that's why they're called gay.
You're happy.
All right, most of the time. Okay, any questions? If not, we will actually end class 10 minutes early tonight.
Well, that's
Wow, that's
Um,
the last.
Again, thank you, last class for a while, but come to the conference in June. It will be extraordinary. And
Depends on what.
and then we'll do Tarot and Intuition this fall. In the interim, I have something resembling a break. All right, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. For those of you who are attending online.